Ruth, thank you so much for joining us and for being willing to be our first person. We have a short period of time, and you have so much to share with us that we're going to start right away, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You were just 6 years old when Hitler came to power in 1933. Before we turn to your life under the Nazis and what the Holocaust meant for you and your family, let's begin with you telling us a little bit about your family in the early years, your early years, and before you moved to Berlin.
Well, I grew up in a little town in Germany, which sometimes was Germany and sometimes it was Poland. We had a little house. My father was a butcher. My mother was a homemaker. And we had a very nice life. I had my grandmother, my grandfather I never met. And my grandmother, she was, whenever there was a birthday, she was a seamstress. She made little dolls for me and dressed them. And it was really very nice and quiet years. And in either 31 or 32, we had relatives come from America. I don't know how they were related to us. But they said to my father, who was an Orthodox Jew, but he was a very staunch German. If I can say that, I think he was first a German and then a Jew. Also, he was an Orthodox Jew. They said, we are going back to the United States, and we sent you the paper because it doesn't look good here. And my father said, if I ever leave Germany, it will be with the last train, which came true. He did leave Germany one day before the Jews were not allowed to get out anymore. By the way, my father fought in the First World War, and he got the Iron Cross, which Hitler took away from him.
Ruth, your family had lived in your little town for generations, hadn't they?
My family had lived for generations, and actually we had an Italian name, and my father never found out why. I found it out in the Jewish Museum in Berlin. The place where we lived was hundreds and hundreds of years Italian, and that's where my Italian name comes from, Arnoldi.
Ruth, in 1932, your family moved from the town, as you said, where the family had been for many, many, many years, to Berlin. The next year, in 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Tell us what you can about why your family made that major move from a little town to Berlin, and what life was like for you in Berlin, especially once Hitler took charge the next year.
Yeah, well, actually, when we moved to Berlin, my father had a poultry store, but it didn't work, and he had a job in the cemetery I don't know why. You know, children were not told everything. And it didn't go, and they gave up this apartment. And Hitler came to power a year after we got to Berlin, and immediately there was a terrible hatred for Jews. They had a newspaper that was the Stürmer. The Stürmer is like storm, and they had pictures of Jews. No Jew, no human being looks like this. It was hunchback people with a nose 3 meters long and dark hair and cheating people. That was in the paper. And it was very, very difficult. I started school in 1936 and right away, 1933. And right away, a girl called me a Saujud, which was a pig Jew. The teacher took her out and told her, and he really took his life in his hand because the girl's father was an SS man. That was Hitler's Schutzstaffel. And I went to school for, a year and a half, 2 years, and then I was thrown out and had to go to a Jewish school. And when you ask me it was very uncomfortable, to say the least. And from here on, it got worse and worse.
Besides not being allowed to attend German schools any longer, what were some of the other restrictions that were forced on you and other Jews at that time?
Well, it started right out that we could only go shopping between 4 and 5. And also Hitler had said that he will build a world that is, I even don't have the word for it. And he used to say that what the people do doesn't mean anything, but for what he's building is for eternity. Because he had a sense of grandeur. I mean, he started out, and we could only go shopping between 4 and 5. There really was not enough to eat. I grew up on the potato peels and cucumber. I don't know how my parents managed. Do you want me to say about that we on the street, I don't want to go ahead.
I was going to ask you one thing about your brother Ernst,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
No.
He had severe epilepsy,
Yes.
so much so that he had to be institutionalized. He was killed by the Nazis. Tell us about Ernst. What do you know about him? What do you remember about him? And when did you learn about what happened to her? What did they tell you at that time?
Well, my brother had epilepsy and he couldn't be home because both my parents worked. That was in 1936, and so we had to, he was in a home. He was completely normal. The only thing was that when he had the seizures, he couldn't be left alone at home. He could have hurt him very badly. So he went into a home which was outside of Berlin. And this was a very nice place. He was completely normal. And I repeat that because people think, oh, well, you know, he was not normal. He went to school there. As a matter of fact, he skipped a grade. And we visited him every Sunday. He never complained. And as far as I know, I was a little child. I think that the people in that institution were very nice. And then there is a great time that I know quite what happened to him. But then one day, it was I am not quite sure about the year, but I think it was 39, when people were already sent to concentration camps, and we got a letter from the German government or whoever, and it says that he died of a heart attack. He did not die of a heart attack. With 18 years, most of them do not die of a heart attack. He was so close to me. When he was still home, he took care of me, and he always called me my little mother. In German it sounds, my little Mutterchen. And it was horrible. We never know what really happened to him. And I thought that, you know, he was all alone and he must have suffered terrible. And, you know, maybe I'm going a little ahead about telling this, okay. I think it was 1939, and for almost 75 years, I always had the fantasy that sometime, the doorbell would ring and he would come. Well, it didn't happen because he was already killed.
And that was something you learned recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that he was killed, but I always wanted to know where and how. I mean, I wanted it, and yet I was afraid. Mm-hmm. But when I started to work here, I asked somebody, a very nice gentleman, who was he was in the concentration camp. And he went, I was doing my thing here, and he disappeared. And after maybe an hour, he came and he handed me papers. And for the first time, I knew that my brother did not die of a heart attack. He was killed. And I knew where he was, somewhere in Chelm in Poland. And as sad as it was, it just freed me of some fantasy, and I knew he was gone, and there was nothing I can do, especially not after 75 years. I did always have a fantasy that sometimes the doorbell will ring and he will be there. That's not.
Ruth, you also shared with me that you had, as a little girl, a chance meeting with Hitler. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, you know, as I said, we could only go shopping between 4 and 5. We also were only allowed not only to go out on the street between 4 and 5, but we were not allowed to go where we only were allowed somewhere the Nazis said you can go there. But we were not allowed to go to the neighborhood where Adolf Hitler's Kanzlei, where his office was, where he made all the plans for the destructing of the Jews. But you know, he also, as I said in the very beginning, they had this imagining thing about the Jews, the way they looked. Well, Jews did not look like this. And so we could do something that was, we didn't look like Jews, the ones that Hitler.
The stereotype.
Yes, yes. And my father had red hair, my mother had black hair, and I had the red hair, which people always thought I was Irish. And so we went on a Sunday afternoon in the neighborhood where Adolf Hitler had his office, where he lived in his office. We took a real chance where we did, but we were really, I mean, we were kind of like restricted. So we went there, and suddenly the people who were the non-Jews, they said, Adolf Hitler comes, der Führer kommt. He had the title, der Führer. And everybody was wild. I mean, they were just, and especially women, they were screaming, der Führer kommt. And of course, we were very scared.
They were screaming with joy.
We were, yeah.
They were screaming with joy, yes.
And we kind of
Yeah.
did our thing. And my father couldn't let on anything that he was scared, but he was, because if they had found out we were Jewish, we would have been shot on the spot, because Hitler had his SS Schutzstaffel. Those were who guarded him. The men and their dogs were as tall as the Statue of Liberty. I mean, really. And so what could we do? We could just be very enthusiastic. And as he came in his little red sports car and had his hand on the side, he put the people who were there, it was mostly women, they were hysterical. They pushed me towards his car, and he was sitting like this, and he said, Guten Tag, my child. And the women were screaming. The Führer, that was his title, touched that child. And they said to my parents, that is fantastic. You must be so proud. And my father said, oh, he was very proud, you know, that, thinking that if somebody found out, they would have killed us. And we just acted normal. But of course, inside we were, I mean, I remember that feeling. And so when he drove off, we just went very quietly our way.
Ruth, on the night of November 9th through 10th, 1938, vicious attacks were made on Jews, on Jewish property, Jewish businesses throughout Germany in what became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Your family was directly affected by Kristallnacht. Tell us what you remember about the aftermath of what happened that night?
Well, it's somebody shot somebody, and so of course we knew that the SS will do something. The German. When I went to the Jewish school at that point, and I had an hour to walk to school, and across from us where we lived was a Jewish butcher. And as I got out, the window was bashed in. All this glass was lying around. And I thought, well, maybe somebody wanted to break in. And as I went on walking, every Jewish store was destroyed, everyone. And that was kind of, it got my attention, of course. And I went to the Jewish school at that part. Next to the Jewish school, around the corner, was a big Jewish temple in Berlin. That was the biggest temple. And as I got there, not only was the temple on fire, but they took the Torahs, that are the Jewish 5 books of Moses, they threw the Torah rolls, they are really holy, into the flames. And then when I got to school, the teacher said, there is no more school, and we went home. Somebody must have told my parents that they should leave our apartment because everybody will be arrested that night. So my mother and we went to my uncle's house, which was really terrible. We did the wrong thing because the Nazis arrested all the wealthy people, and my uncle was very wealthy, not my parents. And so when we got to his house, he went someplace. No, they arrested him. He went to the concentration camp. That was the beginning, really, of when the men were arrested. My mother and I had packed a suitcase to stay there for, and the windows had to be blackened. I mean, with some something, and that was wrong because it was very. But to tell you in what condition my mother's mind was, when she unpacked her suitcase, when she opened it, all there was in it was towels.
That's what she'd put in there, just towels.
She just put in towels. So I tell you this to let you know what condition. And my mother and I were there for 2 nights and two days. And we slept in one bed because we needed to be together. I don't think we slept very much. I want to get back to the synagogue. And the teacher said, go home, there is no school anymore. But when I saw the flames, I have to tell you that I am not schizophrenic. I saw these flames for the next 75 years. Every time I went to service and they opened the ark, I saw flames coming out. Our rabbi helped me to overcome it. I do not say flames anymore.
But it took that many years to overcome. It took that many years.
It took 75 years.
75 years. Ruth, when you and your mother went to her sister's home, where did your father and your brother Lothar go?
I never know.
You never knew.
He went with my brother, and I have never know because they didn't talk about it because my father and my brother was not arrested because they didn't have the money. They arrested the very rich people because they all went to the concentration camp. I had another uncle who also went to the concentration camp on the Kristallnacht. And then Adolf Hitler made the rule that the Jews had to give 6 Judenrate. That means they had to give all their money in 6 times. And then when they swore to that, then they was discharged, and my uncle, one was alone, but the other one had a wife, and they went then illegally to Belgium. So that's, the Kristallnacht, I think, is one of the worst. I mean, everything was just, my childhood was not a childhood.
Ruth, after Kristallnacht, you just continued to live in Berlin.
Yeah.
And in 1939, Kristallnacht was late 1938, you were supposed to leave on what's known as a Kindertransport.
Yeah.
Tell us what a Kindertransport was and why you didn't go.
There was, you know, some countries, for instance, it was England and Australia. They took children in so that they could leave Germany. And I was supposed to go to Australia in 1939, on the 15th of June, and I said that I was sick. I said I couldn't walk. Well, that wasn't. At that point, I thought I was sick, but later on, then I couldn't go. So then the next transport was on the 15th of September 1939, but on the 1st September 1939, the war broke out, and then I couldn't go. Now, I have thought about it as I was a grown-up. As a child, it never, I didn't think so about it. I was very clear that I was not sick. I said I couldn't walk. I did not want to leave my parents. I just lied. I don't see it as a lie, and I was also very attached to my parents, and I couldn't imagine that I could live without my parents in Australia. And as it turned out, I left Germany then with my parents.
As it turned out.
Yes.
Ruth, as you just said, World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. You had just turned 12 years old. Mm-hmm. You would live in Berlin for the next 2 years while the war was going on. Tell us what that time was like for you.
Well, it was, if anything was, it was worse than before. Mm-hmm. Because before, as I told you, the food was very rare, very, rationed, and they had rationing card. Of course, the Jews got something that was this size. In the middle was a big J, and the little squares that we gave the people in the store had a J on it, so that everybody knew we were Jewish. Of course, we were only allowed to go shopping between 4 and 5, and there was almost nothing anymore, nothing more to eat. My father met somebody, a woman in the farmer's market, and she said, if you give me silver and crystal, we were not rich, but we had that from my parents, she said, I give you meat. So when I came home from school, I did go then half a day to the Jewish school, shared with the boys. And my father put in crystal and silver, or gold, I don't know. And we went with the tramway. That was, of course, to the farmer's market. Mm-hmm. Very dangerous, because if some SS man would have said, what do you have in there? And we would have been shot on the spot. I mean, if you went on the street, somebody could just shoot you. He probably gets a reward for shooting 2 Jews, So the woman puts this in, and then we went home. The only thing is that she gave us pork, and we did not eat pork. But my father, and I really, I have the greatest respect for him. He gave his children pork because he did not want his children to starve. So we ate pork. It was horrible. I mean, with every bite, it was, of course, then when go ahead, he went back to it, but what I want to, we had, about the the J that we had a, what do you call that? A, you know, something that,
The yellow stars?
a yellow star, and with the word Jew in it, and there was a Star of David, and we had to wear that all the time, and it had to be sewn on. So do you put it on a summer dress or on a winter dress?
Because you had one each, right?
One. That was another thing. I mean, they could have given us two, but of course everything was geared to do something terrible for the Jews. So when somebody rang the doorbell, we had to quickly put on our coat and put it on. Do you want me to tell you?
Yes.
So my mother sewed it on a coat that hung by the entranceway. And one year, I think it was maybe a year to maybe 1939. It was the night before our highest holiday, Yom Kippur. The doorbell rang at 5 o'clock in the morning, and in came two huge SS men with dogs. Well, it was...
They came into your house.
Yeah, and we had only one room where with the four of us, my parents, my brother, and I slept, because we had a very nice apartment, but we were only allowed one, and the rest was rented to some relatives of ours, which is... Anyway, those SS men came in, and they stood there with their dogs. When I just say dogs, I get very upset. This is many years ago, and I still... they came in, and we all got up, and they just stood there. They just stood there. And the dogs, of course, were trained fabulous. They stood there. The thing was that we were not allowed to have a radio, but my parents, I don't know why, children were not told, had a radio standing on a closet covered with the thing. Now, we were not allowed to have car. But my parents were saving that for a neighbor. I don't know what happened with them. But there was that radio. And again, I repeat this all over, because if they had said, what is it? And we had showed it to them, we were all shot. I mean, I repeat that because that was the theme. We were shot, everything. They stood there, what seems to me like eternity. It probably was 15 minutes, and they left.
And didn't say a word, and didn't say a word.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nobody said anything. And they never saw that radio up there. And they left, and my mother collapsed. Thank God she, was okay. But that was before our highest holiday that day, Yom Kippur. And just as an aside, I just can't touch a dog. No matter whether it's a big one or a little one, I cannot touch a dog. That is a long time ago.
Ruth, during that time, of course, it's war. Berlin was being subjected to air raids. What did that mean for you?
Well, we had, in our apartment, we had a air raid shelter, only for Jews. Now that air raid shelter, it was a joke. I mean, there was the sticks, I call it sticks. It was, I mean, if somebody would have sneezed, they would have come, but we had to go in there, and we, every night there was an attack on Berlin. That didn't bother us, just the opposite. I mean, we couldn't. But sometimes we went out of the air raid shelter. About 3 houses away from us, there was a factory where they made the uniforms for the soldiers. And they first, at 12 o'clock, there was a British, and before they threw the bombs down, they had, I think they called that light bulbs, not bulbs, but in order to, and right, the bombs come after that.
Like incendiary bombs?
Yes,
lighted
like
up.
yes. And one night, a bomb hit that building, and it went up like this. Well, we were very happy about that. We only lived 3 houses away, but it didn't do anything for there. From then on, came, at 12 o'clock came the British, and at 3 o'clock came the Russians. And sometimes my brother, who worked very hard, didn't even go in the air raid shelter anymore because he was so tired.
In fact, you told me that at some point you sort of became fatalistic, like, what's the point?
Yes, that's right.
Ruth, getting out of Germany and going to the Dominican Republic became a possibility for your family in late 1940. Tell us what made it possible for you to be able to have the possibility of going to the Dominican Republic, and what did it take for you to actually get there? How did that happen?
My uncle, he went, after they released him from the concentration camps and they took all his money, he went illegally to Belgium, and Hitler marched into Belgium, and again all the Jews were put in concentration camp. He was put in Gurs in the Pyrenees in the concentration camp, and from there, he was there for a while, and then he escaped over the Pyrenees. He walked to Portugal. When he was there, a man from the United States came there were several Jews who got together, and they wanted some Jews out of Berlin, and he met them, and he said to them, if you want to become a farmer, the Dominican Republic wants to have 100,000 Jews. Trujillo, who was actually like Adolf Hitler, he was a
dictator.
Yeah, he was a dictator, and but the reason he wanted the Jews in 1938 in Avion, there was a meeting of 39 heads of state, including Mr. Roosevelt. I have to say that because I will never understand that every country who was there said, we have no space for the Jews. The only one was Trujillo. And he said he will take 100,000 Jews, but Adolf Hitler didn't let them out, and only 1,000 came. Anyway, my uncle met this man, and he said he wants to be a farmer, and he could get his family. So one day we got a letter. We didn't know whether he was dead or alive, so we didn't hear from him because he was in the concentration camp. And he said he wanted us to come. And we said, okay, we want to. And people used to say to my father, where is the Dominican Republic? Why would you want to go there? That was a stupid question. And my father said, at this point I would go to, I don't care where it is, but at this point I would go to the moon because we have to get out of Germany. And my uncle sent us a paper. And it was a little difficult because we were not sure, you had to be examined and everything. We really didn't think that we could get out. But anyway, we did all the things, and then we went, there was an age limit also. It was worse and worse to stay in Germany, and there was more and more concentration camp. And there was an age limit, and we were so that my parents, we could all get out, but then Adolf Hitler raised the age limit, so my parents could not have come out. I don't know, it's kind of little.
But just so we all understand, and the age limit was you could not leave between the ages of 18 and 45.
Yeah.
And at that time, your parents were over 45,
yeah,
and you were under 18, so you had that kind of small window that allowed you to go.
Yes.
And as you said, Hitler changed the age, so then, and the reason that those 18 to 45, because they had to stay for forced labor.
Yes.
And then Hitler raised the age to 60, and then your parents wouldn't have been able to go. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, as I said, my uncle sent us a paper, and we had to do all kinds of things. You had X-rays to be sure. And we each had to have made a suitcases. They had to be made. One is here in the...
We saw the photograph of one of them, right?
Yes, I saw the photograph, yes. And so we packed our suitcases. No, we didn't pack the suitcase. We put everything what we could ever allowed, certain things. We went no silver, no gold. My parents only had their wedding bands. That was the only thing we can take. My brother and I, we didn't have gold and silver. I mean, and then we had to put it out, and we had to have the suitcase made to order. And somebody from the government came, and he had to pack the suitcase so that nothing went in that was forbidden. But we just put it out. My father and my mother, when they were married, they had for my father's and mother, they had 2 silver candlesticks. They are about this big. And we put it out because we did not want to get into trouble that we took. Anyway, the man came, he was an old man. He was from the government, but he was not a Nazi. He was from the old school. And so my parents stood there while he packed the man, and they were shaking because those candlesticks. And the man picked them up, and he said, "They are tin. You can take them." Well, my parents were, I think they were in tears. Mm-hmm. Should I tell the story, Frank? Is it okay?
It's your story, absolutely.
Well, when we came to the States and we were settled, my husband had to do the state board anyway, he was a physician. One day, I have 3 boys. One day the boys said, "Who's going to get the candlestick? We have 3 boys and 2 candlesticks." Well, I'd have a Solomonic decision. There sits Frank, and I said, the youngest, the first one who marries a Jewish girl. Okay, that was that, okay. Well, one day, Frank came home and announced that he is engaged to a Jewish girl. And I said, okay, you will get them someday, as long as I'm alive, we light them on fire. And Frank piped up and said to his future wife, "Susan, I really don't want to marry you, but I want the candlestick." I had to tell that because after the story, which is really depressing that I'm sitting here.
Absolutely.
And a little bit has to come out.
Yeah.
What was horrible for me was that I had absolutely no childhood. Every day, my mother and I, my father worked at the cemetery. My mother and I, we stood every day on the window holding each other like we were one. We were afraid that, which always happened to Jewish people, whether my father is coming home from work or the Nazis just gave us his working clothes. That means they would have killed him. That was terrible.
Ruth, our time is starting to get short.
Okay.
You have so much more to tell us. So tell us now about leaving Germany, leaving Berlin, leaving Germany, and what happened to you from that point forward, including getting to the French border.
Yeah, we got our tickets, and we went to at night. That night was the train, and we went. My father had to say goodbye to his sister and the whole family, which was really unbelievable. And so we went with the train over France.
And before you go there, as you said earlier, it turned out that was the last train that
Yes.
left Berlin that Jews could escape on.
Yeah, it
That
was
was
the
it.
very last train. The next day we couldn't have left anymore. And the man who was our companion, he was from the Jewish
The joint
joint
distribution. Committee.
distribution. He said, if you have anything that you are not allowed to do, please, please throw it out the window, because we had a transport yesterday, he said, and somebody, the women had it sewn in the clothes, gold pieces. They were sent back, and you know I do not have to talk what happened to them. So we got to Portugal, and
You got to France first, right?
we got to France,
Yep.
and there we were all examined. And when I meant examined, we were examined. We all had to get undressed, naked,
And you're 14 years of age, I think.
because they examined every opening if we had something hidden there. And I was 14 years old. Anyway, nobody had anything. We could go on. In Portugal, we lived in a pension, and the food was terrible. We were not used to their food. And we had hoped that the ship, the Pinto, would come soon, but we were afraid Hitler would march in. He didn't. And after three weeks, it came, and we went 3 weeks on the open sea with the Pinto, who was not the Queen Elizabeth. We were 4 things down. And then we came to the Dominican Republic.
What do you remember of that trip? What was that like for you?
Horrible.
Horrible.
I mean, we were all seasick. It was a freighter. We were at the 4th down, not on the second one, on the first. The sailor was standing up there. We could never take in a shower or anything. So for 3 weeks, we didn't take a shower. We got to the Dominican, everybody was seasick. And there were about 50 Jewish people on the ship. There were other people too. And we went with Pearl Harbor, the 7th of December, 1941. We landed in the Dominican Republic, in Ciudad Trujillo. It was called Ciudad Trujillo after the dictator. He was a dictator. He killed Haitians. But he was, for me, I remember the thoughts that I had. I thought, are we going to stay here now forever with our life? Or are we and I tell you my thought exactly. Or are we going to be put in mothballs, not literally? And then when the war is over, we will go back and we are just here. So it was a terrible thought. The Dominicans were very nice to us. When I met it was a very small town. When I met a Dominican who said, "Buenos dias," and I said, "Is he going to shoot me now?" And that went on for some time.
Do you remember when you reached a place where you felt genuinely safe? Do you remember that?
Yes, I think after a few months, and I thought how nice and gentle they were. And I went to school. I had to go to school, and the school was run by German Jews, but we had to speak Spanish. They didn't allow German, and rightly so. If you live in a country, you speak the language. It took me a year. But when I saw how every day they were kind and gentle, and said, well, there are obviously other people than the Germans. That was then. And I had to go to school, and then I wanted to become a nurse, so there was a small hospital, and I became a nurse.
Tell us how you got started. Your mother went and said, my daughter would like to be a nurse someday. How did you get started?
Well, my mother went and she said, please, she talked to the doctor, which later turned out to be my husband. She said, you must take her. And he said, but she's too young. I was 15. And so they agreed on that. He will give me a chance and see if I can do it. Well, I could do it. And with 17 and a half, I became a nurse. He was my chemistry teacher. While I was going in the hospital, I mean, we had courses, and he flunked me. And later on, he said he had to marry me because somebody who doesn't know chemistry cannot be left free on the street. Because he was a chemistry major. This is just a little, I would like to change the mood because what I told you is horrible. And when I tell you the story, I get the same feeling. I never had a childhood. I never was a teenager. And I resented when people were, no, I didn't resent it, but I was jealous. Later on, when I saw young people, they were happy, and it was, a part of my life, growing up makes different stages in life. Well, I did not have at least 3 stages in my life. I never was a child, I never was a teenager, and you must have it in order to gradually grow and be a healthy human being.
Ruth, will you just say a little bit about your husband, what brought him to the Dominican Republic, just a little bit about that.
My husband was from Austria, and he graduated it was the last school year for the medical department where they admitted the Jews. The next class was already thrown from the second balcony, the student, and they were thrown out. He was finished, and he worked in the Dominican Republic, and we had a little hospital, very small, but it was really it was nice. And the reason we wanted to leave, we had our first child. He sits there, it's the other one, not the one from the candlestick. He was born there, and his father delivered him because the doctor from the next town, when we called him that I'm ready, he said, oh, that will take long, she will be in labor. But he came very fast. He couldn't wait, So his father delivered him. And also, he did everything that you do with little boys, circumcision. And my father he wasn't a rabbi, but he did that. And so our family was and my husband wanted to be a child psychiatrist. And he was not possible in the Dominican Republic. He called somebody, and he said that he would like back to school in the city. But they said, no, they do not want foreigners. They were very good to us, but that they didn't want, okay. And so we know that my first child, we just didn't feel that we want to bring him up there. There was no, we just didn't want it. And so we waited for our visa from the United States, that is a different story, because we had to wait a long time, and then we finally got it, and he came here. He was a year and a half, and his friend was a garbage man who always came, and the only few words he said to the garbage man, that he said, how are you? Kuku was his name. That was his friend. And we wanted him to go up here and he also became a physician, like his father.
Ruth, your parents stayed in the Dominican Republic, didn't
Yes.
they?
So people always said, why don't you let your parents come? Well, my parents had a beautiful little house there. My mother had a help. She came every day. All right, it's a long time ago, but she paid $9 a month. And my mother was on in years, and as father, it was hard for her to do the work, and they had a garden, a beautiful house, something that they couldn't have had here. They came here in the summer, and we went there sometimes in the winter. So they were very happy. They never learned Spanish, and so did everybody else of their generation. So they, my mother had in the afternoon the ladies for coffee and cake and talk about other people and, you know, gossip a little bit. And that made their life very, and they didn't speak English. And, you know, I don't think they could have survived the winter here because the Dominican Republic is tropical.
Ruth, I think I'm going to stop asking you questions. We have a couple of minutes to turn to our audience and see if they would like to ask you a question. So we have 2 mics. You can see them in the aisle. We would appreciate it if you would go to the mic, make your question as brief as you can, and I'll repeat it just to make sure that we hear it right.
Thank you.
And then Ruth will respond to your question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Ruth, you indicated that your brother who had epilepsy, you received notice of his death in 1939.
Mm-hmm.
When was he separated from your family and institutionalized?
The question is, your brother Ernst, when did he leave the family, and do you know when he was euthanized, when he was killed?
Yeah, I don't know when he left the family, but when he, you mean when he
Went to the
went
home?
to the home? I really don't, that I don't know. But the other thing was,
When was he actually killed? Do you?
well, we got a notice, I think it was in November, I think it was 1939 or 1940. But the man who was here and who gave me the information, he told me where he was killed. I don't think he had a date. But he told me that he was in a Polish town, and it was, I think he had the date there, but I'm not sure.
And it was at a concentration camp?
It was in a concentration camp in Poland, in Chelm.
Helm, yeah.
Was it your parents' decision that he leave the home?
I think Ruth had explained that his care needs were so severe and they were forced to work, so that was why he was cared for at a home there.
And after he left the home, did you see him at any time? Did he come home for?
Did we see him?
Did you see him?
Yeah, we visited him every Sunday. It was near a beautiful park. We took a thing like going to a picnic. And I mean, because he was normal, and we took him out for the afternoon for the whole family, and he was very happy there because he had companionship. When he was home, he was alone. That's why we couldn't keep him, because both my parents had to work.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have another question. Time for, I think, one more here.
Ruth, you said a couple of times that you never had a childhood and you never had a teenage years. And I'm wondering what it was like for you then to become a mother yourself and to raise boys, what challenges there might have been for you there with your
The question was, as you had said, that you really never had a childhood. You never were a teen. And later, when you became a mother, what was that like for you then to be raising kids that had childhoods? And what was that like for you?
It was very good, and I played with my children, and that was a normal time. I was a mother. I had the children. I loved to play with them. They go up, and each one had their special things that they wanted to do, which later became their profession, whatever they wanted. And it was very good. I mean, we had a lot of fun together. And I was very happy that my children didn't have to go through what I have to go through. One of my children once asked me, when I remember, they played outside with their friends, and no sooner were they home than they called. And I said, do you have to call all the time? And he said, Mom, didn't you do that? And I said, no, I had other things to do then. And we didn't have anybody to play with because we couldn't be outside, you know that? And it was just not a childhood. And it has something within me that if you ask me about them, I think that I was not as free or something because later on I got used to it, but I figured here they come home, they just talked, and here they come home and talk. Well, that is a normal thing. What I had, it was not the normal thing. I couldn't understand why they were carefree, thank God. That's what a child should be. Oh, they did their work, they went to school, they were good students, and they were crazy, like they should be. I don't mean it the way I said it.
But I think everybody here understands
Yes.
exactly what you mean.
But we're not crazy. I was not a goody-goody child, but I was not a child, really. I was old when I was 10 years old.
I'm going to turn back to Ruth in just a moment to close our program. I want to thank all of you for being with us today. Remind you that we'll have first-person programs each Wednesday and Thursday until the middle of August. So we hope that you might have the opportunity to come back and visit us again. Our programs throughout April will all be live streamed, and all of our programs will end up on the YouTube channel, so you can see this one with Ruth and all of our other programs this year. When Ruth is finished, to close our program, when she's finished, our photographer, Lolita, right here, is going to come up on the stage. She's going to take a picture of Ruth with you as the background. So we want you to stay put for that, if you would do that. That'll be just in a moment. And then when Ruth is done, Ruth will stay on the stage for a while. We invite you to come up here and meet her, give her a hug, ask her a question if you didn't have a chance to do so. So she'll stay with us, and please come up and join us then. It's our tradition at First Person that our first person has the last word. And so with that, I'll turn to Ruth.
As you know, my name is Ruth Kohn. I was born in Germany, and I was born 1927, so you can figure out how old I am, and left in 1941 on the last train that the Nazis allowed us out. I thank the directors and staff of the Holocaust Museum for offering me the opportunity to tell my story of my early life in Nazi Germany. My sons, especially my sons and especially my granddaughter, encouraged me to contact the museum, and I feel privileged and fortunate, but also morally obligated to do this. We, the survivors, bear witness, to unspeakable torture and destruction, and the death of countless victims. We all share the responsibility to protect human life. So it is important to educate all generations, especially our children, about the atrocities committed in Germany and elsewhere, and to shine light on terrible truths are often denied, so that this will never happen again. I am humbled that in my lifetime I have been transformed from a young person terrified by the Nazis and fearful for my life to somebody who can now share those experiences with visitors from around the world. And for this, I thank the museum, which is an international beacon of Holocaust education. I'm gratified to be able to help the public learn more about the Holocaust, and I hope to continue this as long as I can. And I pray, never again.